Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Lisa Savage from Code Pink in Maine. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bruce.
Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us more about yourself, where you live, and what you do for a living, and also give us more of an idea about Code Pink.
Well, I am a Mainer. I was born in Maine. I went to Bowdoin College, but I lived outside the state until about 1988. Now I live in Solon, Maine, and I work for the local school district there as a teacher, high school social studies teacher, and also a literacy coach, K-12. And I became a Code Pink local coordinator about 5 years ago. And I have been active in my local community with community-based peace groups and around the state since that time.
What does Code Pink do on the national level? Because you're like a local chapter of...
Yes, and I'm also on the national staff as a volunteer for the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign. Code Pink is mostly known for going into congressional hearings and being the voice of the people who stands up and says, but drones are killing innocent civilians, and then usually is asked to leave those hearings. They have spoken up at appearances by President Obama, by federal appointees, and most recently they have been the voice of the people at hearings on United States intelligence, such as the National Security Administration and mass surveillance.
So you oppose wars by both Republicans and Democrats? You don't just oppose wars by Republicans?
No, the fire did not go out of me when Barack Obama was elected president. He voted for the war supplemental while still a candidate, really before the election. He also voted to give the telecoms immunity from spying on us under the Bush administration. So it's been pretty clear to me since before the election that Barack Obama worked for the same corporations that the Republican president had worked for, and in fact his policies have been at least as warlike, possibly more so.
Well, you've been a leading peace activist in the state for some years now. That's in addition to your full-time teaching job, so a lot of people marvel at your energy level, by the way. But what compels you to be so active?
Well, a combination, I think, of being a history major and recognizing patterns in our society that, to me, are very alarming and that we've seen before in history, and they lead to terrible things, genocides, horrible world wars, and a lot of suffering for people. So I'm very concerned about where we stand right now in 2014 and where we're headed. I have a grandchild. So mostly this is empty nest syndrome for me, Bruce. I spent a lot of time and energy raising children, and when my youngest child left home, I suddenly had a lot of time and energy. But I do have a grandchild, and I worry about the future for my grandson and for my great nieces and nephews and my own children.
Let's talk more about some of these issues that drive you, particularly the connection between military spending, something you've worked on quite a long time, Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign here in Maine and nationally through Code Pink. So the connections between military spending and cuts in education and other social programs. Now, you've witnessed personally as a teacher, I'm sure, these cuts in education in Maine. Can you talk about, some of this, these connections?
Sure. I think this is a good place for a visual. This is a pie chart that my husband helped me make. He's also an activist. And it shows, this is based on data from the National Priorities Project, which you can go online and check their federal budget data. This would be the discretionary budget that Congress allocates each year. So these are the income taxes that Congress can decide how to spend. Certain things like Social Security are dedicated payroll taxes, and they're not at their discretion. But when you take that whole, they currently are spending, this is fiscal year 14 budget, 57% of the discretionary federal budget is spent on the military.
So 57 cents out of every discretionary tax dollar.
That's right. So if a person pays $1 in taxes, 57% of it is going to the Pentagon. Many people think, well, does that include the Veterans Administration? Because they feel a commitment to take care of veterans. It does not include the Veterans Administration. Furthermore, it does not include the Energy Department research on nuclear weapons. So actually, the slice of the pie, depending on how you define military spending, could even be bigger than this. Everything else is over here in this pink slice of the pie, so health, education, environment, jobs, energy, VA, and so forth. Because of cuts coming from the federal government to the state, and then from the state to local entities like your school district and mine, our towns, the local taxpayers have been asked in Maine over the last few years to pony up a lot more of the cost of educating students, of paying for the pensions of the retired educators. And so in my school district, we've seen several small elementary schools close. We've seen a reduction in force, which is what layoffs are called in education, of classroom teachers and educational technicians who support students. We've seen programs slashed, and I teach in a very small high school, a very rural high school, with declining enrollments because there aren't many jobs in the area, and we struggle to have a music program for students and things that most people would consider pretty basic to a high school education. And this is true across Maine. In more wealthy communities where property taxes are higher and can be raised without too much distress to the residents, you don't see as many cuts in school programs. But all of the municipal entities in Maine, Portland, Bangor, Augusta, Lewiston, struggle mightily to come up with the funds to educate their children.
Well, the military budget, just the part where the 57% is today, is around $700 billion a year. Mm-hmm. But as you say, there are some things that are not in that budget. You named the Energy Department's work on nuclear weapons, Veterans Administration, many other things, including the NSA budget.
Is part of the Pentagon budget. The NSA is funded through the Pentagon.
Oh, okay. But other aspects like the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, they're off budget. And so when you add up these various other pieces, the military budget actually grows to about $1 trillion a year, mm-hmm. a massive budget. The war with Iraq is supposedly over. The war with Afghanistan is supposedly winding down. Why do we need a military budget of $1 trillion a year? What are we doing? What is this defense budget really about?
Essentially, it's about spending lots of money with defense contractors, in other words, corporations that create great profits for their top management and their shareholders by building weapon systems. Most of the money does not go to maintaining troops on the ground in Afghanistan, but it is another factor in the equation that the Afghan war in particular has been phenomenally expensive beyond anything that the United States had experienced before. They now estimate it costs over $2 million a year to keep one soldier in Afghanistan. A lot of that is because of supply routes, but $2 million a year, if four soldiers weren't sent to Afghanistan for a year, that would fund my entire school budget. Mm. So the scale of what doesn't get funded, and the massive profits of some company like General Dynamics or Raytheon or Boeing, the scale is very different.
Code Pink has done a lot of work in Maine and nationally around drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. Why are you concerned about drones?
Drones are particularly used against civilians, and they many of the drone strikes that have concerned Code Pink, that have killed children, grandparents, people, farmers working in their field, are not actually Pentagon drones. They're CIA drones. And the sort of famous kill list that President Obama goes over every Tuesday with his advisors, those are CIA drones, and they're under the executive branch of government. So one of Code Pink's big concerns is, where is the oversight for this program? Where is the transparency? It's not an accountable program. And like most governments that are engaged in illegal activities, our government is quite secretive about it and will make false claims such as no civilians have been killed. This is an incredibly precise program. These are surgical strikes. We have lots of intelligence before we make a strike, but when someone like Chelsea Manning, former Bradley Manning, who was a whistleblower in the Army that revealed lots of information, or Edward Snowden reveal information, it becomes clear that those claims weren't true, that drone strikes are quite clumsy and inaccurate. And in many cases, the people that live in the areas where drones are overhead all the time, such as Yemen, such as the sort of tribal border areas between Pakistan and Afghanistan, those people report that their entire life is changed by having this noisy flying killer robot hovering overhead all the time. They're afraid to send their children to school or go out into the field and harvest food or pick up firewood because people have been killed doing all those things. Some of the drone strikes even target U.S. citizens. This has grave implications for the Constitution, which some of us are naive enough to still believe was a pretty good document, and we'd all be better off if our government were guided by it. Deciding in a Tuesday meeting in the White House who shall live and who shall die is a direct violation of the Fifth Amendment, which guarantees people due process.
What does that mean, due process?
Due process means being charged with a crime, having an opportunity to see the evidence against you, having an opportunity to be represented by an attorney, having your day in court where you face your accusers. And a private secret assassination program has none of those elements.
So you're saying drones are basically lawless?
The way they're being used to assassinate people over in other countries, yes, they are pretty lawless.
Now let me ask you this. I saw a poll recently that said the majority of Democrats support President Obama's drone program. I can promise you that if George W. Bush was president today, those same Democrats, by a majority, would oppose his drone program. Why is it that Democrats, a majority of Democrats, look the other way when President Obama uses drones and kills innocent civilians?
I think there are various reasons. The probably primary reason is that people do not have real information about what's going on. The United States just sank to 53rd in the world in terms of press freedom under the second Obama administration. 1 in 4 Americans say they don't trust the network news to tell them the truth. But I don't think that most Democrats are finding their own information in a way that gives them the type of facts that you and I might have access to make decisions about, do we think this is moral? Do we think this okay? The second reason I think will be much less politically correct for me to say, but I've seen it in action so many times I feel I have to say it, and that is that most liberal white Americans are not willing to oppose an African-American president. It is their get-out-of-racism free card, and they're not giving it up.
Let's talk a bit about Maine's 2 senators' views on drones. First of all, Angus King, our newest senator from Maine, independent. What do you think about him commenting that drones are a more humane weapon?
Well, I think that Angus King is an independent, we should probably note, so we don't know of him owing anything to either the Democratic or Republican Party. But he is a self-made millionaire. He is a corporate thinking person who's interested in profits. And I think it's not unlikely that he hears from lobbyists. There's quite a big drone caucus in Congress, and there are lobbyists just swarming Capitol Hill telling senators things like these are a more humane weapons program. I don't know Angus King's views well enough to really speculate about whether, if certain people said that, I would say what they mean is less Americans are put at risk when you use a drone because the soldiers on the ground are not there in harm's way. A drone hovers very high in the sky, and the people pulling the trigger are literally thousands of miles away. That completely overlooks what Veterans for Peace co-founder Doug Rawlings just called moral injury at a talk that I was at the other night, and I think that's a very good phrase. The moral injury of using a flying robot to kill people as opposed to an armed person is essentially the same. But I guess I have to think that Angus King is buying the PR out of the White House, saying, oh, these are surgically precise strikes, and we know exactly who we're killing when we kill them, and we don't kill any civilians or children, which are just bald-faced lies, but perhaps Angus hasn't done his homework enough to know that those are bald-faced lies.
Okay. Our other senator, Republican senator from Maine, Susan Collins, doesn't want civilians who have been killed, that data, that information about their numbers, their names, their locations. She doesn't want that information shared with her constituents in this so-called democratic society. We, the taxpayers, are paying for these wars. We're paying for these drones. Should we not really have the information about what they're doing, the damage, how they're used? What's your opinion on that?
Well, Susan Collins is on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and it was in that context that she voted against revealing the statistics. There's been an ongoing sort of trying to discover the truth around drone strikes and who they really kill. And originally the administration, Obama administration, had said, oh, we don't have that data. And then it turned out that, oh, well, actually they do keep track. So Susan Collins voted not to let the public have access to that information about who actually is killed.
Couldn't someone say that, well, she's protecting military secrets? It's not necessary for the people to know that?
Again, I would remind you that I believe the drone program we're talking about here is the CIA's assassination by drone program. It is not the Pentagon's use of drones, say, in Afghanistan, where they're conducting a long war and occupation. So I don't think that saying this is a military secret is probably, she would be on very firm ground, because it isn't actually a military program. It's a CIA program, which comes under the executive branch of government. As you and I would know, the CIA has engaged in clandestine assassinations and regime overthrow for decades. And the reason that they would want to keep their activities secret are, I suspect, that most American people would not approve and would no longer want to fund or support such programs.
You recently organized in December, last December, in a very cold day, I was there. You organized a protest in front of Susan Collins' office in Portland, and you took into her office several hundred petition signatures about this drone issue to her staff. What came from that?
Well, her staff in the Portland office was very polite and listened to why we were there, took the petition from us, and we haven't heard from them since. I did have occasion to call their office about a month later on another matter and asked them, I haven't heard back from us bringing the petition, and they said, it's in our DC office, they're checking the addresses of those who signed, we'll get back to you. So that was, again, almost a month ago now. I haven't heard back, so not much movement there.
All right. Do you think, well, increasingly we're seeing drone applications, as they like to say, here in the United States? The Pentagon has announced 6 different drone test areas across the country, and they anticipate 30,000 drones in the next few years will be flying across the country, essentially surveilling us. Do you think that this is a danger to our civil liberties here in the United States?
Well, I think mass surveillance of any kind is clearly a threat to our civil liberties. Whether it's from a drone hovering overhead, they have a kind of camera and visual capability called Gorgon stare on some of the drones, that the drone itself would be so high above your head that with your bare eyes you wouldn't see it, but it can photograph an area miles wide, and it's very precise or very, high resolution, so it can zoom in on one particular thing, a person walking their dog, and you'd actually see the dog and the leash, and these are used to target the drone strikes overseas. And the drone operators report having, post-traumatic stress disorder, or if you prefer moral injury, because they can actually see the people die, and they can actually see, oh my gosh, we just killed a kid. So that's
what's
how
the danger here,
precise.
What's the danger here in America of drones?
Of living under constant surveillance that can see right into your backyard. And
why would they want to? Maybe they're just looking for terrorists. Why do you fear them? The U.S. military surveilling you? What are you afraid of?
I don't think that the U.S. military is a respecter of the Constitution, or really a respecter of human rights. So if our Defense Department exists to defend us, then why would they be hovering over Maine, surveilling everything folks do? I see it as being pretty much like the NSA's, collects all our cell phone data, all our email data, all our online purchases. This has been going on for years, with the NSA claiming, no, we don't do that, and then there's another leak and they realize, oh gosh, actually it's been revealed that we do.
To what end is all this being done, this NSA and now the drones? To what end is this surveillance in the United States happening?
To control and intimidate people. Most people are too scared to speak up even now, because they feel that the government is hostile toward people speaking up in defense of the Constitution or in defense of civil rights, and it has a chilling effect. Again, I'm a history major, so I could name any number of societies going back to ancient times where there was a spy network in place, and everything that you did or said, you felt like Big Brother was watching, and that has a chilling effect on dissent and freedom of thought and speech, I think.
Kind of like the Stasi in East Germany, I guess, huh?
I think so.
There's talk about putting a so-called missile defense deployment site in Rangeley, Maine, in western Maine. What do you think about that?
I don't know if you've ever been to Rangeley, Maine, have you?
I have not.
It's not too far from where I live. It's up in the western mountains, so sort of near Sugarloaf, if people have been there skiing. It's an extremely beautiful part of Maine. As I understand it, missile defense is defense in the same sense that our Department of Defense it's meant for offensive warfare. They call it defense because it sounds more acceptable. I think, if I understand these type of missile defense sites, it's underground, so this would involve blasting the western mountains of Maine, the Appalachian Range, and building something underground. It would be very bad for the environment, and I believe these type of weapons, correct me if I'm wrong, you study this more than I do, are intended as if the U.S. made a first strike on Russia or China or some other nuclear-equipped power, that when that country fired back, this system would try to take out their return volley. Am I understanding that correctly?
Excellent.
Okay.
The sword, when the U.S. thrusts the first strike sword against Russia or China, thrust the sword into their heart, as you say, they fire their retaliatory nuclear capability. Missile defense is the shield that is then used to deflect their response, giving the U.S. a quote-unquote successful first strike attack. And so, indeed, these interceptor missiles going into Rangeley would be key elements in U.S. first strike attack planning, which makes them prime targets in and of themselves for obvious reasons, I think. But the most troubling thing is that the United States is building this first strike attack system. In fact, the U.S. Space Command annually war games this very scenario that you laid out against Russia and China. It's very destabilizing, very dangerous, and highly expensive.
Well, the highly expensive part is the real key. When you are judging the success or not of a U.S. military endeavor, you always need to look to the profits of the corporations that will be building it, your Raytheons, your General Dynamics, and so forth. During Occupy Wall Street, the phrase was coined the 1%, meaning the financial elites who own most of the resources and control them. Really, military contractors are so rich, they are the 0.01%. And so even if missile defense doesn't work very well, as it hasn't in tests, I'm pretty sure Raytheon still gets paid. And our Congress is mostly controlled by such corporations and their lobbyists at this point. So saying whether it's a success or a failure, I think, is a meaningless question unless you look at the bottom line of the for-profit corporation that's going to be building it.
Right. We're getting close to the end, but I want to ask you another important question. There's going to be a christening of the Navy's new stealth destroyer, the Zumwalt destroyer, at Bath Iron Works on Saturday, April 12th. Veterans for Peace and other peace groups are going to hold a protest there that day from 10 a.m. to noon, calling for the diversification and conversion of Bath Iron Works. With the coming reality of climate change, why aren't we building rail systems and solar and wind rather than more weapons systems for endless war? Can you comment on this idea of converting the military-industrial complex? And we only have about two minutes left.
Well, I think conversion is our only hope, Bruce. It's more sustainable than building weapons. It actually produces far more jobs than building weapons. And it strikes at the argument, you can't cut the defense budget because we'll lose jobs. Well, if we were to convert the defense budget to building something people actually needed, you'd have jobs galore. So will the profits of General Dynamics, which owns Bath Iron Works, which is the largest employer in the state, be impacted? Maybe they would be impacted. Again, why don't they convert to building something that people need and want? That seems to be the writing on the wall to me.
Yeah, the state of Connecticut just passed a law creating a conversion commission in their state, just passed it last year in their last legislative session, mandating the state create a planning process to move away from dependence on military spending. They see the writing on the wall.
It's a great idea. Maryland has done something similar, and I believe the federal government itself gives grants to communities to do this kind of conversion planning. Yeah. So I know there's some interest in Maine about looking at that angle too.
Yeah, so we really need to bring that forward. Well, Lisa, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce.
We're down to about 30 seconds. How about a quick final closing word?
Well, I really respect the work that you've done to get some information out there. And if there's anything that I could urge citizens, especially young citizens, to do, it's find your own information. It will be the difference between whether you can navigate the rest of the 21st century or not.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for coming on the show. And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.